Today on The Big Story, Boris Johnson and the Conservative Party win big in the UK election. SEA Games aftermath, Singapore athletics responds to criticism. And using simulators to help learner drivers, all new learner motorists to do simulator training from December 16. You're watching The Big Story, where we'll discuss the top news of today and explain why it matters. I'm Dylan Ang, coming to you live from the Straits Times newsroom. The highly anticipated UK election have drawn to a close, with Prime Minister Boris Johnson's Conservative Party winning an outright majority. The win gives him the numbers in Parliament to deliver Brexit by January the 31st.
I want to thank the people of this country for turning out to vote in a December election that we didn't want to call, but which I think has turned out to be a historic election.
Mr. Johnson's Conservatives won a comfortable outright majority in the 650-seat Parliament. The results saw shock upsets, with seats held for decades by the Labour Party going to the Conservatives. To discuss the significance of this result and what it means for the UK and Brexit is Deputy Foreign Editor Bhagyashree Garika. Hey Bhagya.
Hi.
Now Bhagya, welcome to the show. Now let's get straight into it. How shocking is this result?
Okay, very shocking. Now on a scale of say 1 to 5, where 5 is like super shocking, I would say it's a 4.
Right.
And the reason that's so is firstly, in the lead up to this election, all the polls were saying that the gap between the Labour and the Tories was narrowing. And some were even predicting that there might be a hung parliament where no clear majorities achieved by either party.
Right.
But what do you have? You have a clear and sweeping Tory win. So that's one reason why it's a complete shocker. Then there were some other outcomes which have been pretty shocking as well. One was the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Jo Swinson. She lost her seat. And then you have the Scottish National Parliament,
Right, yeah.
which performed very well. It's a landslide in Scotland. I think PM Boris Johnson used this word stonking. So stonking is what describes his win. I had to look that up. That basically means massive. So huge, exciting victory.
Right.
And that's what it was.
Right now, Bhagya, there's already been some angry finger pointing among the main opposition camp. What are some of the reasons for such a loss?
Okay, so for Labour, well, not to be too unkind, but I think Labour lost the plot. If you look at their performance, they've lost in areas which were Labour for a very long time, for over, I don't know, since 30, 40 years or even longer. In fact, one estimate I read somewhere says this is the biggest loss for Labour since 1935.
Wow.
Why is that so? I think one reason is that their economic program, which they put forward, was seen by voters as radical, quite left-leaning. So it didn't buy confidence among the voters. The other thing is on Brexit, they said they would hold a second referendum. Now that possibly is not something that the voters might have wanted. The mood probably was that, okay, so let's Brexit, we've had a referendum and now let's be done with it. So which is anyway the thing that Boris Johnson was holding out for. And they seem to have bought his message. Some people have also pointed out, polls have said this, that Mr. Jeremy Corbyn's leadership wasn't spot on. Some polls showed he had confidence of very few. I mean, 67% actually said they didn't trust his leadership. So, that just points to the problems that there were within the party, and they went into an election like this.
Definitely not the kind of statistics you want to have going into an election.
Exactly.
Now, Bhagya, the biggest question on a lot of people's minds, and the reason for having this election, of course, is Brexit itself. What's next for Brexit?
Okay, so Brexit, one of the first things that Boris Johnson said after, in his victory speech, that they are going to get Brexit done by January 31st, 2020. So you will see moves for this in Parliament. I think on next Tuesday, you have the new MPs take their oaths. And 2 days later, you have the Queen deliver speech, where that'll lay out the priorities that the new government has, and Brexit will be right up there. And once Boris Johnson does manage to have, Parliament agree to his version of Brexit, and which he says he wants to get it done by January 31st, you will have until the end of the year, during which the relations between EU and Britain will sort of remain frozen. So things will be as they are. That's the transition phase. And within that period, Boris Johnson can seek an extension of that. By July 31st, he can, if he wants to extend that period, he can. But otherwise, he has to figure out a lot of deals. He has to figure out what kind of relationship he wants with EU, what he wants with Asia, many other countries. So all that is now up on the cards.
Now, Bhagia, on a final note, the Scottish National Party have of course, won 48 seats, which is, the third largest number of seats. There's a potential for another Scottish independence referendum. Could this have been the last general election for the UK as we know it?
Well, the Scottish National Party leader, immediately after this landslide win in Scotland became apparent, she said she would press for a second referendum. So the first referendum was held in 2014, and there you had a vote for Scottish independence. I mean, the voters rejected it, 55 to 45%. Does this mean automatically that because SNP has won, they will vote for independence? I think that's an open question. I think she herself said, Nicola Sturgeon herself said, it doesn't mean that every voter who voted for SNP is going to vote for, independence. The other thing, of course, it's the ball is also in the Prime Minister Johnson's court. So he will have to agree to Scotland's request for a, referendum. And then, of course, another complicating factor, you also have elections in Scotland's legislative body by 2021, I think. So that's another, chance for things to clarify before the big question comes. But yeah, I mean, plenty of analysts have said that the map of Britain, the political map of Britain is basically redrawn. And things are going to be very different. I mean, Labour basically has to resurrect themselves. They have to reflect at what went wrong, and then, pick themselves up again. And Tories, of course, will be busy interpreting what this massive mandate means for them. So yeah, you're right. It's certainly a very historical election.
Right. Well, thank you, Bhagia, for your analysis and for coming on to our show. If you'd like to keep up to date with all the latest happenings in the UK, head on to our website, straitstimes.com. Moving on to our second story, it's been 2 days since the 2019 SEA Games drew to a close, and while we've had successes, there has been some fallout. Singapore Athletics has responded after it was the target of stern criticism over the state of the local sport, which resulted in a dismal SEA Games performance. In a media statement, President Tang Wen-fei expressed contrition, saying that this was a wake-up call and that more focus and work would be needed to rebuild. This was in response to comments by Singapore Sports Institute Chief of High Performance, Richard Gordon, at a post-mortem for Team Singapore's SEA Games performance. Mr. Gordon said the sport has a propensity for infighting in the past 2 to 3 years and has to get its act together. Now with us in the studio to share more is correspondent Sazali Abdul Aziz. Hey Sazali.
Hi there.
Now Sazali, let's start off with what happened this time around to our athletes. How did they perform?
Well, Singapore returned with 3 bronze medals in total. And considering that, major games like the SEA Games, Asian Games have over 40 events, usually that's obviously not a very good return. But I wouldn't pin it down on the athletes who travelled there. Obviously, we know they tried their best. They wanted to do well for the country. But the situation has not been helped, by issues like that have arisen, such as arguments between coaches and officials. Parents getting involved, saying, why is my son or my daughter not running in the relay team, and then last minute decisions to pull out runners and switch relay combinations and stuff like that. So all this is unsettles the athletes, and I think it's hard for people to expect gold medal winning performances when there's so much uncertainty.
Right. Now, Mr. Richard Gordon, of course, he noted a decline in results in the last 3 SEA Games. That's actually 6 years. How far have we actually fallen?
I think the jarring statistic for this year is 0 goals. which is obviously never nice to see on the table. But I would say that it's actually a continuation of a decades-long problem, not just a recent one. I did some looking back, and in 8 editions of the SEA Games from 65 to 79, we won 33 gold medals, and in 20 editions since, which is more than double, we've won fewer. We've won 26. Partly that's down to there's now more countries in ASEAN and the SEA Games competing, and obviously standards have increased, and if we don't if we don't improve accordingly, we're going to lag behind, and that's what happened. It's been masked by the fact in the 90s and 2000s that James Wong used to win gold medals at every SEA Games he went to, and we had a couple of China throwers who also regularly won for us every 2 years. But yeah, I think it's a difficult problem for Singapore athletics to tackle. I think one key issue is attrition in athletes, because a lot of, we tend to have a lot of success at age group level, under 18, under 16, even at schools, international or regional level. But by the time these athletes reach, so-called their peak age at 23, 24, 25, they've dropped out completely of the sport. So I think that's something that if we want to see the best of our athletes, we have to tackle.
Now, Sazali, besides Mr. Gordon's criticism of the athletics team's performance, the Singapore National Olympic Council also chided football for how the FAS dealt with the 9 players who broke the curfew. Now, what is the current situation with that?
So it's been over a week since we broke the news. I think it's a very multi-layered issue that has the FAS and the authorities have tried to piece together. So originally 6 boys were named as breaking curfew. They went somewhere. Obviously they weren't allowed to even leave the hotel. And 3 boys were later named 2 days later, and they went separately. So it was a separate incident. Either way, the FAS was criticised by the SNOC for firstly naming the players, and also convening a disciplinary hearing for them on Wednesday night, which was eventually adjourned to a later date. FAS yesterday, late last night, they came out and responded and said, they did this, for transparency and accountability, and they said they only released the players' names once they had a written and oral admission from them. So, I know the sentiment from the ground is, some people feel that FAS threw the players under the bus to distract from a poor campaign, which obviously the Young Lions had a poor campaign. But I personally don't think so, and I think in due time, when maybe all the facts are made public, then I think some people will agree as well.
Now it's looking like a bit of an uphill task, but what do you see in the immediate future for Singapore athletics?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, it's a decades-long problem. So I think even at regional level, it's going to be a struggle. I think it's like starting a 100-meter race 20 meters behind already, because you look at Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam, they've won medals at the Asian Games. Malaysia are producing a clutch of very good young sprinters at the moment, and the Philippines have their diaspora of foreign-based athletes, half Filipino and half overseas athletes. So it's really difficult. But I think if the right support is put in place in terms of financial support and also systemic support, for example, for like we mentioned, attrition, to tackle attrition, maybe support for student athletes who are in university, for example. I think that could help our athletes, and I think we have a couple of really good teenagers, Eric Yee, the thrower, and Kempton Kam, the jumper. I think with the right support, I think they can go pretty far.
Right. Well, thank you, Sazali, for discussing this story with us, and we certainly hope that there will be brighter days ahead for all our athletes. Now, to read Sazali's full story, visit straitstimes.com. And now let's move on to What's Trending, where Renee will share with us what's buzzing in the internetverse. Over to you, Renee.
Thanks, Dylan. It's time for What's Trending. First up, US President Donald Trump came under fire again for criticizing Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg. The 16-year-old was named Time magazine's 2019 Person of the Year on Wednesday. Trump called her win ridiculous, tweeting that Greta had an anger management problem and needed to chill by watching a good old-fashioned movie with a friend. In response, Greta changed her Twitter bio to just that. Guess who has no chill now? Next, Keanu Reeves fans rejoice. The superstar will have sequels to two of his most iconic roles, Matrix 4 and John Wick 4, out on May 21st, 2021. Fans online have expressed their excitement for the sequels and called for the day to be Keanu Day. The films are by two different studios, and the release date appears to be a coincidence, given that this is seen as self-competing. If the date holds, this move can only be seen as one for the fans. We welcome the Keanu-sans. And finally, the ancient skill of Thai massage has been added to UNESCO's prestigious heritage list. Originating in India and practiced in Thailand for centuries, the massage was popularized when a school opened in the 1960s to train massage therapists. An hour of the service, which targets the body's acupressure points, can cost as little as $7 at local massage parlors. And it's good for you too. Studies have shown that Thai massage helps relieve back pain, insomnia, and even anxiety. And that's all we have for What's Trending today. If you've seen a story you want to share, link it in the comment section below. Back to you, Dylan.
Thanks, Renee. Now, planning to sign up for driving or riding lessons in the near future? From Monday, December 16, all new learner motorists will have to undergo driving or riding simulator training before being allowed to book their practical tests. Now, multimedia journalist Fazana Friday got a chance to try it out. Take a look.
I really like that you get to simulate different stuff. It's like an arcade game almost. Very good for those who are a little anxious about going on the road for the first time. The good thing is that they will tell you what your mistake is and how to rectify it, although you won't get to try it again.
Now, to see the full video, do visit our website, straitstimes.com. And now with us in the studio is Friday, appropriately on a Friday. Hello, Friday.
Hello.
Welcome to the show. Now, Friday, tell us about these simulators. Are they really for all new learners?
Okay, so they are only for new learners who register after December 16th. This includes private students as well. So this includes only for bike and car drivers, which means class 3, 3A, 2, 2A and 2B, with at least 5 practical lessons before that. So they have to do this simulation training before they can book their traffic police tests.
Right. Now, Friday, how exactly do these simulators work? How do they help learners actually practice?
Okay, so if you did take your driving or any of your licenses, you would know that during a practical lesson, you may not encounter a lot of these traffic hazards. So basically, the simulation works to prepare students for various road situations and inculcate good driving defensive habits. So some of these road hazards, all of them include the top 10 causes of traffic accidents that can lead to injuries. So some of these include the high-speed expressway cornering, cyclists in blind spots, even things like wet weather conditions and night driving conditions.
Right.
So this actually helps to expose the students to this situation so they are better prepared when they go on roads.
Now, I think the big question on everyone's minds is that they are all wondering how realistic the simulators are. Tell us about your experience.
Okay, well, definitely for me, I thought it was really fun. Think of it as an arcade experience. Like in an arcade game, you'll be seated on either the bike or a or the car. So it's really interesting because you would expect it like a video game, but it includes real-life scenarios of these traffic accidents. Simple things, even like road obstructions and cyclists on the back. So I found it interesting because when you are on the machine, it moves according to how you are moving. So if you do crash or you go up the curb, there will be feedback on the machine itself. So it's fun in that sense because you do experience these things when it does happen in real life. And the good thing for all of these students is that there's no grading system. So it's not a pass or fail. It's just a training experience to help them experience these different things. So there's not really much of a pressure.
Right.
In fact, I think it's really good for those who are really anxious about going on the road for the first time because then it gives them like a nice segue before they officially get on the road.
Yeah.
And it
like
does
a realistic experience
does.
before they go on.
It actually does indeed.
Yeah.
And the good thing is, I think it provides additional help for students because they might not really see this when they are on their lessons. So this will actually get them more equipped for the future.
Well, thanks Friday for coming on the show and for sharing your experience with us. There you have it, the top stories for today. For more news and videos, visit straitstimes.com. And once again, I'm Dylan. Have a great weekend and join us next week for more stories on The Big Story.